Good evening, everyone. Let's take a look at some flashback facts. Found in northern South America, bordering the Atlantic Ocean between the Dutch speaking Suriname and Spanish speaking Venezuela, is Guyana. The only English speaking country in South America measures 83,000 square miles and is home to a population of 785,479. This motherland was once influenced by the Dutch and British and gained independence on May 26, 1966. Although the nation is one of the poorest in South America, it records increasing growth in GDP per capita. The illustration presented here shows Guyana's growth in GDP per capita from 2010 to 2018. If you check it out, you'll see there is about a 4.6 and above growth rate and a total growth rate of 30.75. This growth rate is mainly attributed to agricultural activity, industry, and service sectors. These activities were once the bedrock of Guyana's economy. The country's main source of energy is petroleum imported products, which accounts for 21% of total national imports. Various sectors, for example, the electricity sectors and the transportation sectors, are almost 100% reliant on these products. The country's electricity distribution system is known to be unreliable and expensive. Businesses rely on diesel power generators to employ some cost effective measures and reliability. These facts are unattractive to foreign investors. We will now look at the history of oil exploration in Guyana, beginning from the 1970s. So, in the 1970s, petroliferous activity was recorded by Dutch explorers, but it was until 1926 a well was drilled at Bat Sugar Estate and it produced gas which was used for domestic purposes. In 1950, we began offshore exploration. 1960 to 1970, offshore drilling was undertaken by several companies including Conoco, Tenneco, and Shell, and others. 1975, Shell's Abare 1 found several shows. 1980 to 1990, we continued. In 1992, good quality oil was confirmed at the Caranambo Well 1. However, the commercial future of the find did not materialize due to geographical reasons. 1991 to 1992, Total drilled its Arapaima 1 with no returns. 1996, CGX Energy Inc., a Canadian based company, began negotiations with the government of Guyana to acquire offshore concessions for oil exploration. However, in 2002, an oil rig which was hired by CGX was forced out of the Quarantine River by Suriname's gunboats. Fortunately for us, in 2007, the United Nations International Tribunal of Law of the Sea awarded 33,000 square kilometers to Guyana in its international border dispute with Suriname. In 2008, oil giant ExxonMobil commenced exploration offshore Guyana. In 2010, Takatu Oil and Gas Inc., a subsidiary of Canadian firm Groundstar Resources Inc., announced that it was drilling for oil in the Takatu Basin in the Rupununi. I will now hand you over to Philip Liket that will take you through additional finds and other aspects.
The history of Guyana's oil industry was forever changed when major oil discoveries were found in the Starbrook Block by ExxonMobil. In 2015, they found commercial quantities of oil in the exploratory well Liza 1. In the period following, between 2017 to 2019, 15 other successful exploratory wells were drilled and produced commercial quantities of oil. From the first two wells alone, Liza 1 and Liza 2, it is estimated to contain approximately 1.4 billion barrels of oil equivalent. In total, it is estimated that the total recoverable reserves from these wells is over 8 billion barrels of oil equivalent. From the data, this would make Guyana the 12th largest in the world in recoverable oil reserves. However, exploration comes at a cost, and it is estimated that the cost of exploration and development of the Stabroek Block stands at US 8.1 billion for the period 2015 to 2019. And as of January 2020, Guyana's first million barrels of oil was shipped to the USA for refining. Now, as Guyana enters this new age of oil wealth, there are some challenges the country currently faces that may hinder them in taking full advantage of this boom. On the political side, significant reforms are required on the regulatory and legislative frameworks regarding the oil and gas sector, as current petroleum legislation is outdated and dates back to the 1980s. The Department of Energy, which was only recently formed, is still in the process of crafting new laws to cater for this new oil economy, and currently there is no regulatory agency that oversees the oil and gas sector. The consequences of not having proper regulatory and legislative frameworks in place is that it leaves Guyana dangerously exposed in terms of regulating, supervising, and monitoring the sector. It may also leave the sector underdeveloped, inefficient, and prone to an abuse of power. Secondly, as Guyana's election was recently held on March 2nd, the results of the election have not been declared, as the process has been plagued with issues. In Guyana, voters are generally split along ethnic lines, and has been so for many years between the APNU-AFC coalition and the PPP. The current issue being faced in deciding the results is a request for a full recount of the votes. This activity was to be supervised by a team from CARICOM at the request of President Granger and agreed to by the leader of the opposition, Bharat Jagdeo. However, that process was stopped from moving forward by an injunction from a member of the incumbent APNU-AFC coalition. As this process is stalled and no winner declared, the country is in an uncomfortable position where it cannot pass new legislation or spend the money associated with oil profits and royalties to develop the country, as these decisions require parliamentary approval. The lack of a decision on the results is also causing tensions to rise, as the fate and control of Guyana's vast oil wealth hangs in the balance. Another issue is corruption. Based on Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, Guyana is 85 out of 180, which is an improvement from 93 out of 180 a year ago. It was cited in their 2010 report that economic hardship, criminal injustice, inefficiencies, and racial fractures in society provide fertile ground for corruption. It was suggested that certain indicators show there was a prevalence of bureaucratic and political forms of corruption. And as the oil industry begins to ramp up and the country receives an influx of revenue into the government coffers, we hope the government put mechanisms in place to curtail corruption activities and hold people accountable for their actions. As it pertains to economic development, Guyana has challenges in its existing infrastructure, which seriously needs upgrading in the areas of electricity generation and distribution networks, as well as transport links between coastal towns and the interior regions of Guyana. Enhancing these systems can allow for more reliable supply of electricity across Guyana, which can spur on new economic development and provide easier access to seaports for mining and agricultural activities. Revenues from oil can be used to address this issue once it is managed properly and there are no major cost overruns. Some critics have argued, like Dr. Jan Mangal, that the ExxonMobil product sharing agreement with Guyana could have been negotiated better. More revenues could have been gained through higher royalty payments above 2% and profits from oil above 50%. It is a hope that as new PSAs are drafted for the other wells, that more favorable terms could be negotiated in the best interest of Guyana and with the right people at the table experienced in negotiations. As stated before, Guyana has to repay US $8 billion for exploration and development costs. This is through the cost recovery mechanisms of the PSA contract, and it is subject to the price of oil in the market. Rystad Energy in 2019 forecasted Guyana's cash flow based on a US $65 a barrel. From the chart, Guyana is expected to pay off its debt in the next 5 years. However, with Guyana's break-even price at US $35 a barrel, as stated by Hess Corporation, this value is significant as it determines if an operation is running at a profit or loss. As of March 18, 2020, the current price of the West Texas Intermediate crude is around $22, which is way below the break-even price. This will have a negative effect on the global oil economy as a whole. What it also means for Guyana is that a longer period of time is needed to pay off its existing debt at the present oil price. Expanding on the issue of the previous slide, oil price shocks is a challenge to Guyana. The geopolitical effects of oil rears its ugly head, and the current situation of the price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia is having a negative effect globally on the oil industry, especially on oil producers, which Guyana has now become a player. The excess supply of oil being dumped into the system by the Saudis is plummeting oil prices. Compounding the issue is the COVID-19 pandemic that is currently sweeping the globe. The effect of the pandemic has reduced travel by air and sea and has caused a shutdown of industries around the world, further reducing demand for oil and also dropping the price of it. The price of the West Texas Intermediate crude of $22 has been stated by analysts as the worst it has been in 18 years, and from projections, it is expected to reduce further. Social challenges in Guyana affect education, health, and general access to services. In Guyana, while there is good primary and secondary education enrollment, at the tertiary level, the level of enrollment is at 12.9%. For the oil industry, skilled human capacity is needed to ensure there's a base of local content available for the industry. However, what happens is that skilled labor and professionals who do make it out of the tertiary system emigrate, known as brain drain, as they seek better opportunities abroad. From the statistics, Guyana has the 7th highest rate of emigration. As the oil industry takes off, it is the hope that more people would stay as more higher paying jobs would be available, and that the government would create educational programs geared towards the oil sector to increase the human capacity for it. Another major issue is healthcare. There has been insufficient investments in the healthcare system for equipment, staffing, and skilled resources to work in the field. There are also geographical inequalities in healthcare, especially in rural areas. Investments in this area is needed to ensure better quality of health in the country. Also, weak and inefficient public and private sectors reduce the overall productivity of the society and makes the ease of doing business difficult for foreign investors. Private sector investments in manufacturing can help create new jobs, which in turn will reduce unemployment and increase the standard of living in the country. Another side effect and challenge to Guyana is Dutch disease. This is an economic symptom that occurs where a resource-rich country receives a sudden windfall in foreign exchange due to resource exports, namely oil, which increases the real effective exchange rate. As a result, the non-resource export industries lose their competitiveness and capital shifts to the resource and non-tradable sectors and diminishes the state's economic diversity. Labor shifts also occur from the labor-intensive industries of agriculture and manufacturing to the resource sector. As a result, economic diversity is restrained and the state is now vulnerable to price shocks in the resource sector. In Guyana's case, Dutch disease is not new, as it happened before when the gold boom and bauxite industries were prevalent in the 1980s. More recently, with the upsurge in the oil industry, real estate prices have soared in the Demerara region 4, and production in the non-energy sectors such as forestry, agriculture, and mining have decreased. Proper policies need to be put in place using the revenues from oil to stimulate and incentivize these sectors in order to keep the economy diversified and mitigate against price shocks related to the oil industry. Also, investments in other forms of manufacturing and automation of key export industries can increase their productive capacity and make them more competitive. I now hand you over to Maxwell, who will speak on Guyana's roadmap to development.
To ensure that Guyana doesn't see the same downfall as Trinidad's economy and Venezuela's economy, Guyana must do the following. 1. Sovereign Wealth Fund. Guyana must be able to save 100% of its profits, so in times of need, this saving would act as a cushion. They also must support infrastructure, build roads, and also use this money to run the government. 2. Diversify the economy. The introduction of new sectors would allow for new sectors to diversify the economy so that Guyana wouldn't be solely dependent on oil. 3. Improve human resource. Guyana can focus now on tertiary education. They can improve tertiary education so that these high-level jobs that are given to foreigners can be given to Guyanese. 4. Repay debts. Guyana must be able to repay its current debts, also to repay Exxon, which is the major oil drilling company in Guyana. Supply development. Local supply chains for goods and services must be able to be met in Guyana. And they must raise the production standards to industrial standards to make it fully accepted. Ownership. Partnering with outside companies to gain knowledge and technology transfer would be a total plus. Taxation. Public taxes from oil and gas would be used to improve infrastructure and social services, as well as tax from foreign supplier would do the same. Now hand you on to the next person.
Good evening, everyone. A lesson to learn. From boom to bust, Trinidad and Tobago has gone through the real effects of change over the years. This has been witnessed by their economic growth, drop, and even stagnation driven by one major tradable natural resource. As this nation shifted away from the tradable aspects that were mainly centered on cocoa, coffee, and sugar, the ability to maintain sustainable economic activity waned at times due to pressures streaming from international markets, which were heavily dependent upon the prices of natural oil and gas. Based upon these highs and lows, and in the essence of best practice, there are lessons that Guyana might be able to learn coming from the mistakes of Trinidad and Tobago. I have categorized them as follows: diversification of revenue, the establishment of institutional frameworks and fiscal policies early, treatment of expenditures of the nation sustainably, and also to invest in local development. Starting with diversification of revenue earned, close attention should be paid to the competitiveness of Guyana's non-booming tradable sector, such as agricultural products, tourism, and other commodities. It is imperative to ensure that appropriate incentives are in place for such commodities to contribute to the national revenue sustainably, allowing them to play a supportive role, especially as the demand for labor within the energy sector grows, which would therefore result in a widening of the economic activity and also allow greater job creation. Additionally, this would also aid in possible income stability, which would be greatly needed during times where export of hydrocarbon commodities may fluctuate. Another noted mechanism to safeguard economic prosperity rests with the establishment of proper institutions that possesses the ability to maintain and manage variables associated with trade openness, resource abundance, and the intended national income. It is imperative that in order to escape the clutches of a resource curse, that proper fiscal policies and subsequent agreements with long-term relationships in mind among all stakeholders factor in such variables. This should be done in such a way to avoid the development of grabber-friendly institutions. Calling to reference Hartwig's rule, which calls for the value of an investment to be competitive but still efficient and sustainable, and also to increase the ease of doing business index with an air of transparency. Additionally, with the establishment of these frameworks, monitoring and implementation of fiscal policies and its regulations with transparency devoid of political interference should play a proactive role. One mechanism utilized to achieve this level of transparency was accomplished by Trinidad and Tobago through the establishment of an Extractive Industries and Transparency Initiative Board, aimed towards strengthening the government and company systems, information, public debates, and promoting understanding of projects. When treating expenditures, we look at the ways in which Trinidad and Tobago dealt with its subsidies and other disbursements. In Trinidad and Tobago, transfers and subsidies effectively used up all the state's energy sector fiscal revenues, in part at the expense of the deployment of these energy sector fiscal revenues for capital investments in the economy. The Guyanese government must plan to avoid making such an error. In parallel, it would have to put measures in place to build up its capacity to manage public sector investments. Additionally, one of the major shortfalls of this state was the unsustainable attempt to build its civil society and, in some cases, failure to allow transparency and inappropriate allocation of funds to non-strategic social responsibilities. Once again, Hartwig's rule prompts that the most important assets to which resource rents can be placed are produced by capital, human capital, and financial capital. Indeed, if corporate social responsibility activities focuses on other areas, there is a possibility that it could compromise the long-run growth potential of host communities. Aside from subsidies, another of the big expenditures associated with resource-rich nations has shown to be from its food import bill. Investment in local human capital development along the lines of production of agronomic products can provide a solution to this issue, along with possible additional support from tourism. One successful collaborative venture can be seen through the Mayaro initiative of private enterprises development with BPTT, which aided to facilitate the growth of several small businesses within the area, which created self-sustaining employment and improvement in the quality of life of persons within that area. With that being said, the main points to take home are that diversification of revenue is of paramount importance in relation to economic security. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Followed by the need for the establishment of a proper institutional framework that supports and monitors fiscal policies. Also, the need to treat expenditures sustainably so as to avoid degradation of the nation's economy and impart the opportunities for future generations. And lastly, to invest strategically whilst creating new and continued business opportunities, as seen with the MyPed through BPTT. I now pass you over to my colleague.
Since the discovery of commercial quantities of oil, the Guyanese people have been back and forth about what really are the details of our contracts with these oil companies. This is mainly due to the fact that persons are not taking the time to ensure that they are being fed the facts of our position as an oil rich nation. The government and these oil companies have taken steps such as workshops and using social networks to reach the population and update them on the developments. Some persons believe that we have not gotten the best deal for our rich resources, but despite having questions about our gains from this venture, Guyanese are still looking forward to national development. We will now share with you this YouTube video that will depict just this.
With the announcement of oil production beginning offshore Guyana by President David Granger on Friday last, the country is not only buzzing with excitement for the Christmas holidays, but for what this means for the country. On Monday, we spoke to a few persons on Regent Street to tell us what they're looking forward to most in this industry.
We're looking forward for more benefits for all our Guyanese in this country because, our country, instead of moving forward, we're going backward all the time. We need the government to look into all the problems that we're facing in this country because we're not going through a good time right now in this country, you know that.
And you say what are some of the problems you face?
Well, a lot of taxes on all the items of the food and those things. We're having so many resources in this country, and look where we're heading for.
I don't really understand properly. I wasn't in the country for a little while, so I don't understand.
Oh, there's been oil discovered offshore Guyana.
Oh, that is good, and I'm really glad for that. That is very good, and that's good development for the country, you know what I mean?
I'm looking forward for a better life for the Guyanese people, especially the younger ones coming.
My view about it is that we should attack the sea defense first because that is more important to us, We have to be safe and protect this country so we can continue to have a nice life here because Guyana is really, really sweet. I travel, but when I come back home, I feel like I'm in a better place.
Our country is going forward with new improvement for the country, and I accept what our present president is doing right now.
Persons are now even more excited with ExxonMobil's 15th oil discovery in the Stabroek Block. Reporting for Newsroom, Esanella Patwa.
In conclusion, initial odds are not in Guyana's favor. Amidst the long lines of challenges such as debt crisis, sluggish economic growth, corruption, and conflict, just to name a few, in addition to the external influences such as the price wars between Saudi Arabia and Russia, COVID-19, and the dips in hydrocarbon prices. This double-edged sword with its so-called resource curse has marred many countries around the world, and it was brought on by the failure to utilize its wealth in sustainable ways to benefit its citizens. Guyana has an opportunity to occupy more than just a small share of the world's global petroleum market, but its success could provide a blueprint for future producers wary of making oil commitments in light of increasing interest in alternative energies. However, this depends on their ability to adjust according to the trends and also to adopt lessons learned from other countries who made their mistakes. I thank you very much, and this brings us to the end of our presentation.